All right. So this evening we do have the distinguished honor of having Miss Tamia M. Thomas here with us today to provide some very, very pertinent guidance and information to us today. To share a bit about her, she holds a MA as well as her 6 year certification. There you go. Congratulations, young lady.
Thank
She's a
you.
dedicated school psychologist with a strong background in psychological assessment, counseling, and advocacy for students from early childhood through elementary school. I'm about to steal her from my school. She currently serves as an elementary school psychologist in Windsor, where she provides comprehensive evaluations, crisis intervention, and consultation with teachers and families to support students' academic, social, and emotional development. Tamia earned her 6 year certificate in school psychology from the University of Connecticut in 2023. Followed by, also has her psychological science with a minor in sociology from Central Connecticut State University. Oh, so your paths are similar. Like I'm a Blue Devil and I'm a Husky. When
Uh-huh.
I did the Husky, I did my BA at Central and then my other studies at UConn.
Okay.
Double the pleasure. Her graduate training and internship experience in East Hartford public schools equipped her with the expertise in conducting cognitive and social emotional assessments, developing functional behavioral analysis, writing psychological reports, and implementing individualized education plans. In addition to her professional practice, she engages in meaningful research, including studying changes in infant cry acoustics and examining mentoring satisfaction among college students. She also holds leadership roles in the Psi Chai, that is, right? The
Psych.
gerontology, the
Mm-hmm.
Gerontology Club and Student Service Organization, which reflects her commitment to both academic excellence and community engagement. Her professional skills include administering standardized assessments, developing behavior intervention plans, and collaborating with multidisciplinary teams. She has completed specialized training in autism assessment.
We lost Nisha.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
No.
We sure did. Oh, wait, no, she's there. But
And-
I'm
Hmm.
not sure. Hmm. Well, we're just going to conclude it with you're fabulous. And so,
Yeah, that was.
Kenny should
that
probably
was
get lost in the
fun
sauce because
back.
the list, the accolades just kept going on, and I'd be like sitting there, be like, okay,
yes, we love this. We love
let's
this.
go.
And everybody else who's impacted by your brilliance and by your talents. Oh, wait, there she is. She's back.
No idea what just happened. It just literally went blank and it said Zoom error. My apologies, ladies.
It's
As
the
I was sharing that her skills includes administering standardized assessments, developing behavior intervention plans, and collaborating with multidisciplinary teams. She has completed specialized training in autism assessment, crisis preparation, and parent-teacher partnership. Now, beyond her career in school psychology, you'd be privy to know that she has demonstrated a consistent commitment to service, volunteering with organizations as the Friends Center and CWELF, and she values building connections across diverse communities. With a foundation rooted in empathy, cultural awareness, and advocacy, she is passionate about supporting students and families to reach their fullest potential. Let's put our hands together and give her this platform. Thank you so much, Tamia.
Thank you, Kanisha, for that introduction. So I have my screen shared already, so I'm just gonna get right into it. So this wise conversation is going to be about special education, from evaluation to an individual education plan, a guide to write, rights, roles, and resources. So Kanisha did a lovely introduction. I just want to highlight that I have worked in multiple districts. One of the district I'm currently working in is Windsor Public Schools. I also have worked in East Hartford. I have worked in Bloomfield, and I have worked in New Britain. So I have had a familiar with different districts, and I also forgot that I worked in Hebron. So I have worked in urban, suburban, and kind of, I would consider Hebron a rural, kind of conservative community. So, okay. So overall, the overview that I kind of want to talk about today is just the basics of special education. And then I want to go into parents' rights and then the IEP process. So overall, how does the student get or gets eligible for special education services? And then I just want to highlight some resources in Connecticut that parents can benefit from. And that's pretty much it. I'm gonna move to the next slide. So before I kind of talk about special education, I'm questioning or wondering, did I just mess up my slides? Yes, I did. I'm wondering, does anyone know any backstory or any insight about special education? Did I lose you guys?
Nope, I
Okay.
had it.
Okay.
I had a neighbor whose son had an intellectual developmental disability, and he was on an IEP, and he was really struggling to get all of the necessary supports that he needed in order to challenge him enough that he could progress intellectually. They were like teaching, kind of like treating him lesser than. And they weren't, the IEP wasn't really, it just, I guess from what she explained to me is that it wasn't as supportive of his growth, more so than it was just about meeting the bare minimum requirements for them from a reporting standpoint.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. That's really helpful. And I feel like sometimes in my practice of being a school psychologist, I have seen IEPs are basically based off of like weaknesses or deficits, and we're not highlighting any of the strengths or where the student has really a lot of growth in areas of strengths. And I feel like sometimes as educators, we have to use a strength perspective when we're thinking about students programming and how to support them, because if we're just concentrating on the weaknesses, like why are we not thinking about the strengths? So overall, that's helpful information because I want to talk about what is special education. So special education is where we might see that a student is not functioning in an actual like a general ed peer. We call them typical peers. And we might want some programming regarding specialized instruction. So that student might receive specialized instruction that might be pull out or push into the classroom. And it's overall governed by IDA, so that's Individuals with a Disability Act. And students can be identified with special education services from the age of 3 all the way up to the age of 22. So we know that some students go to college and they receive accommodations and modifications through college. So some accommodations in college might be might need like some reading support, or they might need like some audio to text. There could be like a multiple accommodations that they can receive in college. But I think it's really helpful that that resource is available because that wasn't always the case. I'm going to... All right, so I talked about what kind of constitutes special education. So I want to talk about who qualifies for special education. So overall, there is about 13 categories under IDA. So in order for a student to qualify for special education services, we have to determine if there's an educational impact. So the most common primary disability that we know about is autism, and that's becoming more prevalent in our community, in our schools. Students with autism might have deficits in their speech, they might have deficits in their overall academics, they might have deficits in their fine motor, so that refers to like their pencil grip, their ability to like draw or trace. They might have deficits, and sometimes we see deficits in their overall sensory processing. So that refers to their senses. So sometimes students might have sensitivities to noises, textures, sometimes lights. So that's just one overall primary disability. Students can also have another popular disability is speech language impairment. So that is just a disability where we're only seeing deficits in their speech. So you might see they might have difficulties like being able to express themselves, being able to verbalize their wants and needs, or we might see that there's difficulties with their receptive language. So their ability to understand spoken communication and be able to comprehend that spoken communication. And then it goes back into the expressive vocabulary and being able to answer that, whatever that provider or that teacher said. And sometimes with speech language impairment, we might see that some students might have deficits in their overall pragmatic language, and that refers to their social communication. So their social skills, their ability to interact with peers in a social manner. Another disability that's pretty common in Connecticut is developmental delay. And I'm actually happy with this disability, just a side note, because developmental delay is a primary disability that was only up to age 6. So students in preschool, kindergarten can have this disability up to age 6. However, the state of Connecticut have widened the window so students can have this primary disability up to age 8. So I'm kind of happy about that because I know from my practice, we have a lot of students that we would have to do their reevaluation before their 6th birthday. And sometimes we have those students that are like right on the cusp that might need some supports, but because developmental delay is only up to 6, we couldn't use it. But now that that window has opened, that gives us the opportunity to still use that primary disability. So that's developmental delay. Another disability is emotional disturbance. So a student might have significant trauma that gets in their way. So they might need specialized instruction for that. Students with hearing impairments, they might have like a hearing aid, which they might need specialized instruction for that. Intellectual disability, we see that more in like the middle school in like the intermediate ages, but we can kind of see that still in the elementary level. But intellectual disability is like when we look at a student's overall cognitive functioning. So a student is always tested whenever they're identified with special education services. We have to do cognitive testing, or other words, intellectual functioning. So it's looking at a whole bunch of things like working memory, processing speed, how quickly they're able to do a timed task, also their verbal comprehension, so their overall vocab, and then their fluid reasoning, so that's like in reference to their math skills. And then one last thing is just like their ability to make sense of visual puzzles and patterns. So in order for a student to be identified with an intellectual disability, they have to have basically a standard score, or basically a standard score below of 70 in order for them to be intellectually disabled, as well as when we look at their overall adaptives, we should see some deficits in those areas. So that's one disability. Well, that's another disability. And then multiple disabilities, we might see some students might have autism or intellectual disability. And then other health impairment is where we see students that have like a medical diagnosis. A lot of students might have like ADHD, that's like another other health impairment. Sometimes we have students that have cancer and might need like accommodations or specialized instruction because they are missing too much of school. So they might need like some tutoring, they might need academic supports. And then the last couple ones are visual impairment and then specific learning disability. And that's another disability that I feel like I encounter more around intermediate and the middle school ages, but it's not like to say that it doesn't happen at 2nd grade and 1st grade. But when we think about specific learning disability, we're looking at a student that basically has been receiving either tiered intervention or has been receiving academic support through their IEP. And with years of academic support, with years of tiered intervention, they're not responding to that tiered intervention. So that questions like what is getting in their way of why they can't learn this material. And that's why we say specific learning disability. And that's why I'm kind of saying that we kind of try to look at that around like intermediate and middle school level, because if the student is just like in kindergarten or first grade, how are we questioning if a kid has a learning disability because they only been in school for about 2 years. So it's just like, is it due to lack of exposure? They're still learning things, or is it due to a disability? And that's why some of my practices, I want to give kids more time. And I think that sometimes as school psychologists and as I sit on teams that people try to rush and try to over identify students without actually looking at data. And it's really important that when we're making decisions, we're basing it on data-based decisions or based on data rather than like opinions, because a lot of times teachers, staff members can feel like a kid needs these services or feels like they might fit that label or that primary disability, but when you look at the data, it says something else. So the last thing that I want to just note on is just like example is just a student who has a medical diagnosis and has difficulties accessing the curriculum without specialized instruction. So it could be a student who has autism and might have limited vocalizations or might have limited expressive communication, and they might have difficulties expressing what they need and have difficulties with that academics transferring over into the classroom. So I just want to stop here because I know that was a lot of information. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Now, in your experience, how do you ensure that you have meaningful parent participation throughout the IEP process, especially when families feel so overwhelmed?
Yes. So that's a good question because I feel like sometimes at those meetings, which are planning placement team meetings, it can be a lot of staff members. It can be up to 3 staff members, up to like 10 staff members. And I feel like that can be overwhelming. And especially sometimes the PPTs, the planning placement team meetings could be either virtual or in person. And I feel like sometimes when it's virtual, the parent might not feel too connected with the overall team meeting. So one of my practices, whenever I have a student that we're questioning for special education, and we come to the point of that student is most likely going to get identified, I always try to have a conversation before the PPT because I don't like surprises. So I just want to have that conversation with the parents to let them know, like, hey, this is something that I found in this initial evaluation. This is something that I'm going to be looking for. I don't try to make like too many predetermined decisions before the PPT because I'm not supposed to be doing that. But I just want to make it aware to parents that like, hey, this is what's going on. So it's important that like you have a conversation with the parents, you kind of build rapport with them before the PPT so that you just don't walk into the room and really don't know who the people or the staff member are part of the PPT. And I think that it's also important to talk slow during the meetings, making sure that you kind of like stop and make sure that you prompt them to see if there's any questions. And one of the biggest things that I try to use is parent-friendly language. I think that in special education, we use a lot of jargon and a lot of acronyms, and parents don't know what we're talking about. So it's important that we're using parent-friendly language, we're checking in, prompting them for any questions. And even after the meeting, like I try to stay back with parents and try to ask them like, hey, is there any questions that you have, any of the information that you didn't understand? Because honestly, PPTs need to be safe places. They should be areas that parents feel supported, not like they're feeling overwhelmed and there's so much staff members and they don't know what they're saying. So that's one of my biggest practice that I have, making sure that my language that I'm using is parent friendly, having conversations before the PPT and even having conversations after with the parent, just so that I ensure that they know what I'm talking about and that everything is communicated properly.
Mia, I just want to say that's amazing because number one, that is truly inclusive, right? And you're ensuring accessibility and psychological safety, which is very important because a lot of times I think that certain professionals, and especially when dealing with children, that there is an unfair assumption about either the knowledge level or the learning aptitude of even the parents. And so making sure that they understand and using plain language is, I think, really important for us. And I just want to also say that I appreciate even the fact that you're making yourself accessible for afterwards so that they can ask whatever questions that they might not have necessarily felt comfortable or psychologically safe to ask in a room with many more folks. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that insight because I just feel like with my level, this is like the first kind of interaction or kind of conversation that they might have about special education because I'm the kind of the first defense of them being first identified. I feel like in middle school and high school, they probably already know about special education. So that's why it's really important that that is something in my practice because a lot of parents are first time parents and this is their baby. This is the only child that they have. So just making sure that that environment is safe and they feel welcome and supported.
Yeah. Can you also speak to, or I don't know if this is ahead in your slides, but the predisposition for Black and Brown children to be misidentified as having some aspects under idea that may not be the case because of some behavioral elements or other dynamics?
Yes. So that's actually why I kind of became passionate about school psychology. Because in undergrad I learned about like the disproportionality of like black and brown boys or black and brown kids that are over identified for one of the most common primary disability is ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I think that a lot of that kind of comes from there's like a norm of like what the ideal expectation or the expected behavior is supposed to be for a white boy versus a black boy. And I think that sometimes as we know that sometimes in our education is not the teacher population is not reflected of the actual student population. So we know that sometimes that white teacher might have like a whole bunch of black students and they are not aware of the cultural awareness that sometimes black and brown boys go through. And it's just like sometimes black and brown boys might be more energetic, might have more hyperactivity. And it's just like we're comparing two different kids from two different backgrounds without not even highlighting the overall cultural emphasis. And I think that's where a lot of that controversial and a lot of that disproportionality comes from. And I feel like sometimes I sit in those meetings and a lot of teachers talk about behavior, and then I implement all these strategies, and it's just like you don't want to follow through with these strategies, but it's just like we are trying to help this student improve and learn these behavioral expectations, but it's just like we're not bridging the gap to make sure that that student is successful by implementing those strategies. So it's really important that when I sit in front of those meetings and sit in front of staff members that feel like this way, I really try to utilize data rather than opinions because they're going to tell us all these things about this black and brown boy, but then what does the actual data say? And I think that that's why I really got interested in this field because as an African American woman, I hope to be a gatekeeper to ensure that at my school that doesn't happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to go to my next slide. Okay. So the next portion that I want to talk about is just the overall evaluation process. I hinted on to what is special education. I talked about what are some of the disabilities, but now I want to talk about how does the student even get an IEP. So the first step is a referral. So students can be referred to special education services by, it can either be a parent referral, so a parent can always refer their students to special education services. It's even to the level of students that are homeschooled can get referred to special education services. So I have sat on PBTs where I had a homeschool student that was referred to special education because The parent thought that it was like some difficulties with like the reading and the decoding, but then when I actually did the evaluation, it didn't meet the criteria of special education. But students can get referred. They don't have to be in school to be referred to special education services. So that's one thing. So overall, the parent can refer them. It also can be teachers that can refer them. It can be birth to three providers that can refer them. And I'm going to talk about birth to three in a little bit. As well as sometimes we get like outside providers. So like students might receive like behavioral support from like mental health clinics and stuff like that. They can refer them as well. So anybody can refer them. Honestly, sometimes I have had students like now we have school just started and we have a lot of kindergartners that we don't know. They've never been to school. So sometimes one of my practices is like going in those kindergarten classrooms and kind of observing informally those students to see like what students might be on my radar that might need a referral. And as a school psychologist, I can refer them because I have an obligation to Child Fine Act. So if I suspect that a student has a disability, I can refer a student to special education services. So once a student is referred, depending on what the referral concerns are, will determine what staff member will be present at that PPT. So I say that because if we have concerns regarding academics, a special education teacher will be there. If we have concerns regarding a speech issue, a speech and language pathologist might be there. If we have concerns regarding fine motor, overall sensory processing, an occupational therapist might be there. If we have concerns regarding the student's gross motor, so that their walking ability, their kicking ability, going upstairs, the physical therapist might be there. And majority of all the times, a school social worker will always be there at that PPT. I'm always at that PPT. And then we have the principal that's always there at that PPT. And then sometimes some schools alternate between the principal and assistant principal. And then as well as the classroom teacher, because we want to hear insight from the classroom teacher. So once that referral is submitted, ideally we have 45 days to do this overall process of having PPT 1 and PPT 2 and coming back to determine their eligibility. So I'm going to kind of break that down. So after we do the referral, I will basically process the referral. And then at that PPT 1, so if, say, for example, we're having concerns regarding communication, academics, we might see that there's some fine motor concerns. We would most likely at that PPT, we would include the speech and language pathologist, we would include a special education teacher, and we would also include our occupational therapist. At that meeting, we'll talk about the overall, like it gives the opportunity for the parent to share any updates. We always have to do introductions before we even share any updates, just to get everyone familiar with who's in the meeting. So we do the introductions, parents share their any updates if they have. The classroom will share any updates about like their concerns, and then we go over the referral concerns. After we go over the referral concerns, it gives the opportunity for the people and the team or the planning placement team meeting to actually any follow-up questions to the parents or any follow-up questions regarding the student. And then as a team, we decide if we're going to move forward with initial evaluation. So we can decide if we don't want to move forward with an initial evaluation or if we're going to move forward with an initial evaluation. The only time that I have seen that we never move forward with an initial evaluation, if we're in a scenario where there is like, we haven't tried any interventions or we haven't tried anything before we got here. Majority of the time, we do move forward with an initial evaluation because, say, for example, if there's a parent referral, we want to investigate those parent concerns. But say, for example, if there's a teacher referral and it's about behavior and we haven't tried any behavior interventions before we got here, we ideally want to trial behavior interventions, track them, and then come back to BBT if they don't work. So that's one step that I want to talk about. So that's the evaluation process. So After, if we decide if we're going to move forward with evaluations, we'll talk about what are our proposed evaluations that we might propose. So sometimes as a school psychologist, I have a mixture of things that I might propose. I feel like if I'm doing autism testing, I might do a mixture of questionnaires. I might do an ADOS. An ADOS is like it's basically like standardized testing to look for autism. So it's like I really love the ADOS. Side note, it's a lot of play-based things that you can do with a kid. But it kind of opens you up to like see their social communication, their if there's any repetitive or atypical behaviors. But it's really fun. I love doing it with the kids because it's really fun. I get to interact with them. But overall, I can do like autism testing. I can do some social emotional rating scale. Sometimes I would propose cognitive testing, which I talked about before. And then sometimes I test for executive functioning. Sometimes I might do like a student interview or student questionnaire, depending on how old they are and how their verbal skills are. I know sometimes for my nonverbal kids, sometimes I can't get a cognitive read, and I would report to a nonverbal IQ test. But I just always try to do the first one, the cognitive test first, before I do the nonverbal. But overall, I kind of miss one of the things that I want to talk about. In order for any staff member to do any testing, we first have to get parental consent. So we can't never do any testing on our own. We first have to get parental consent. So parents have to agree on our proposed testing, and we draft up a consent form and send them the consent form. And then from there, once they sign the consent, then we can do testing. I have had experiences where parents have not signed the consent form, and then that basically closes out the whole referral process because we can't do any of the evaluations. So that's one step. So overall, so if we were to propose evaluations, we would complete them. And then so we do our evaluations, we'll get all of our information that we need. And then my district does this. It might be different from different districts. But my district has a multidisciplinary report. So that means that all of our reports all come in one. So rather than everyone having their individual reports, like the school psychologist report, the social workers report, the OT's report, the speech and language pathologist report, we all have one combined. So just to make it easier, say for example, you're sending it to a pediatrician, you can send that one per report to them. So that is always you parents get that 3 days before the PPT, so it gives you the right to review those evaluations, make any questions that you might have, prepare for the PPT. After we do our evaluations, we come back to meet for PPT2. So at PPT2, we talk about overall the multidisciplinary report or our evaluation reports, and we talk about that, and then we determine based off of that, do we see that that student is eligible for special education services? So we have to determine if we're seeing any educational impact. So are we looking at their achievement? So most likely an achievement evaluation would be proposed, and we're looking at that to see like, are we seeing that there's significantly low scores in like their reading, their writing, their math abilities? And if we are seeing those low scores that are significantly low, then that would be a reason why we would warrant specialized instruction. Say, for example, we look at their speech scores and they have some deficits in their expressive or pragmatic language. That would be a deficit, and that would warrant specialized instruction. When we see overall students are performing average, age appropriate on their overall, the evaluations that we propose, that doesn't warrant that kids need specialized instruction. That might need that maybe the kid might need some tiered intervention through the school. And then overall, so if we were to decide that that kid is eligible for special education services based off of our evaluation, then we talk about what is the student's primary disability, which what I referenced before with the 13 categories in IDEA. We have to first determine what is their primary disability based off of the evaluations that we propose. In the state of Connecticut, there is specific criteria that we have to follow for autism. There is a state guideline checklist that we have to follow, which it's posted on the Connecticut website. But overall, there's like specific things that a student we have to check off, and they have to be present in multiple areas. One of the things is like their social communication. Another thing is like we're seeing any atypical or repetitive behaviors. So like any repetitive speech, any atypical behaviors. Like one of the biggest ones for autism is hand flapping, any like hand jerking, or any like repetitive movements. Or sometimes we see is echolalia. So that is like an intonation of their mouth where they're it's like a repetitive intonation. So that is regarding autism, and then also as well as we look at their speech. So in order for a student to qualify with autism, they have to have deficits in their speech. So overall, they're expressive, receptive, and they're pragmatics. So that is for the primary disability. So we have to determine what their primary disability is. And then from there, we talk about, and then I want to stop because as well as we talk about the primary disability, this is another team decision. So like, even though sometimes in those PPTs, I lead those conversations and I talk about like based off of the evidence, based off of the reports, this is kind of my thought process of like, what kind of disability are we leaning towards? And I try to present the case of like why this disability is not appropriate, why this disability is not appropriate. And then I open the floor to the team because at the end of the day, it's the team's decision. It's not just my decision at the end of the day, it's the team decision. So everyone has to agree, even the parents. So I feel like that's a stopping point in the PPT too, where I check in with the parents and I ask them like, hey, does this make sense? Do you have any questions? Do you agree with this team decision? So it's important that we get the parents' input so that they're aware of like why the decision making was the decision making. And then once we all agree on if the student qualifies for special education services, then we would talk about their individual education plan. And then as well as making sure the parents agree. Another point of this is like we have to get parental consent again. So in order for us to implement an IEP, we have to get basically parental consent to implement an IEP. So at PPTs, I talk to parents about like, hey, I will send you a parental copy of the implementation of the IEP. You have up to 10 days to sign the consent form. And if parents don't sign the consent form, it basically operates as a revoke of consent. So that basically terminates the overall referral process and it kind of closes out the system and that student wouldn't be identified with an IEP. So I like that it gives the parents the flexibility to make their decision without like saying at that meeting, I'm making my decision right now.
Yeah, I have just a
Yeah.
quick question there. So if a parent declines it initially, but then they kind of come back around at a later date, do they have to re-engage in the process all over again, or can you pick up where you left off? How does that work?
Yeah, so actually that so if the parent decides to not sign the consent because we already went through the initial evaluation, we can use evaluations up to 3 years. So say for example they come back a year later, we can still use that evaluation that we completed to determine their eligibility. So we don't have to go through the whole overall process again. You probably want to do like maybe some informal observations just to check to make sure that what we saw a year ago is pretty consistent, but we won't have to go through the overall process again because we are given the guidance that we can utilize any evaluations up to 3 years to determine students' eligibility for special education services. And sometimes I have had students that have like outside evaluations that are like autism. The ranges of evaluations ranges, but I can use outside evaluations as well as part of my decision making of a student's eligibility as well. Does that answer your
Great, thank
question?
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So talking about the IEP, so for the IEP, students, well, after we talk about the overall primary disability, we go into the IEP. So what potential services the student might have in the IEP. And then that's the opportunity for the special education teacher to propose their service hours, how they would like their services to be met, if that's going to be for reading, writing, math. And then we also talk about goals and objectives. So like we talk about, like, say for example, our goals that we would like the student to overall accomplish, and then what are some of those specific objectives that we would like for that student to accomplish. And then say for example that speech and language pathologist might propose their services, so they might say that they might want to see that student 2 times a week for speech services, and they want to work on these certain areas in these for the student's speech. So the IEP, I want to know, is all individual to the student's needs. So I know sometimes parents be like, oh, but this kid has this services. Why does my kid not have this services? And I always try to highlight, like, it's based on case by case and it's based on that specific student's needs. And that's why they call it individual education plan. And then as well as placement. So sometimes we have students that I'm going to talk about this more in the next slide, but sometimes we have students that are outplaced. Sometimes we have students that are placed in self-contained placements. Self-contained placements might be like an ABA classroom, or it might be an autism self-contained classroom. We consider that more of a restrictive environment. So we talk about restrictive environment versus least restrictive environment. So least restrictive is where the student is having access to general ed peers, or we call them typical age peers. That's what we call least restrictive. And restrictive is where students don't have access to general ed peers. So they might be placed in a classroom where it's other students that have similar profiles to them. And I feel like those placements are dependent on the student's primary disability, what the student needs. It's all kind of case by case and all kind of student profiles. So that is pretty much it. I want to stop here to see if there's any questions, because I know that was a lot of information.
I have a quick question on, I've heard of like evaluations being referred to as like neuropsych evaluations. Is that just like one type, or is it all neuropsych?
Yeah, so that is one type of neuropsych. So I don't do a lot of neuropsychs. I kind of a little scared about those, but we do have like clinical psychologists that do neuropsychs, and that is kind of one type of evaluation. I know, but it kind of encompasses what I do as a school psychologist. We have a lot of like clinical psychologists that do them and school psychologists that do them. But I feel like when we see a lot of neuropsychs is when we're having those neurodivergent kids, or we might have like a student that has ADHD and we want to understand more about their brain or their executive functioning, because sometimes the neuropsych encompasses the cognitive as well as some processing, as well as investigating their executive functioning, which is their organization skills. So I do see a lot of sometimes parents come in with their own neuropsychs that are completed sometimes too.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Are you going to talk about 504 plans or just only about IEPs?
No, I'm actually have a slide about 504 because I wanted to explain the difference between a 504 and an IEP plan. So I have a slide ready for that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Okay. All right, so I wanted to talk about just your rights as a parent. So procedural safeguards are provided yearly. So those are kind of your legal rights as a parent. They explain any kind of like if you have a disagreement with how the IEP is being met, if you feel like the school is not following through with the legal document, you have a right to mediation. And I think that a lot of parents are not aware of that. You have a right to file a complaint. through the state of Connecticut. And I think that a lot of parents are not aware of that because they just think that, oh, I just have to agree what the team says and that's that. But it's just like, if you feel like the overall district is not following through with the services, the accommodations, you have a right to file that complaint. So one of the biggest things is you have a right to be a part of those meetings. So you should always be made aware of those meetings. You should review those records. So anytime that you have a student that has an upcoming PPT, I would just be looking at any progress monitoring data, because that's one of the things that I know as a school we have to do is like progress monitoring data for the special education teachers. They have to show like if the student's making progress with their goals and objectives, and if not, they have to document that, and we review those at those PPTs. You also have a right to request independent evaluation. So if you feel like the school did these testing and it doesn't kind of meet up to what you're seeing with your child, you have the right to request independent evaluation. And then I talked about you have the right to disagree with the decision, so due process and mediation. And then I just want to highlight, I kind of put this in my the resources for later on. But CC Parent Advocacy Center is a great support. They have advocates. A lot of parents don't know that you can invite advocates to the meeting. So an advocate can be like a person that's aware about special education. They might be aware of mental health. They might be aware about the systems and places that can help children. So it's really important. And then some parents don't realize that you can invite, like, if you have a sister or you feel more comfortable having an additional family member, you can invite that person too. So that's really important that I try to tell parents, because these are their rights and you have rights to these. If you feel like the school is not following through with all these things, you have the right to use your all these things. All right. So this is the slide about 504 plan versus IEP. So overall, when we think about a 504, so I just want to highlight two students, the same student. So I take that back. I'm not going to highlight two students. I'm going to talk about one student. So say, for example, we have a student with ADHD and they have a medical diagnosis. So when a student can warrant a 504 plan when they have a medical diagnosis, as we know with specialized instruction or an IEP, they can also have a medical diagnosis to warrant an IEP. However, the main distinguish between 504 and an IEP is that that student with a 504 does not need specialized instruction. So they might just need accommodations and modifications in order to access the curriculum. When we see a student with ADHD that warrants an IEP plan, we might see that there is significant academic deficits that warrants that they have significant difficulties to function in the classroom, that they might need specialized instruction. So they might need academic supports, they might need behavior supports, or they might need some executive functioning supports. But when we think about a student with a 504 plan, they just need accommodations and modifications to access the curriculum because their disability is not to the significant or the impact of an IEP. So I know there was a question about a 504, so I just want to stop here to see if that answers any questions or if there was any additional questions regarding a 504.
Yes, I have an additional question. So if a student already has an IEP in place, right? And for like a learning disability, but then they were tested for ADHD and now they have a medical diagnosis of ADHD, they cannot be on an IEP plan plus a 504 plan?
So it's kind of so I get your question. So because that student has a learning disability, we have to think about what is kind of the most what is causing the most impact for the student. So even though they're having a learning disability and they're having ADHD, some of those modifications and accommodations can be present in the IEP. So they still can receive what they need through an IEP, but we just have to
Okay.
service for the ADHD through the IEP. Because I
Okay.
feel like once we have two different plans, it kind of gets kind of confusing. And then it would just make sense that like that student would just like, it depends on the district. They might just try to keep him as learning disability, or they might try to say that let's change his primary disability to multiple disabilities so that in the IEP it can show that his primary disability is the learning disability, and then his secondary disability is the ADHD, and then they can program for the ADHD with the learning disability. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're
Oh,
welcome.
sorry. So what you're saying too is that they don't necessarily need to have a 504 plan added. Okay.
And then sometimes, say for example, we have students that have a learning disability and they make so much progress and then they get dismissed from an IEP, because once you get dismissed from an IEP, you don't warrant any academic support. So knowing that that kid has an or got dismissed from an IEP, the school can say, okay, that student got dismissed from an IEP. They still need accommodations and modifications. At that point, let's implement a 504 plan because now they don't have an IEP.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Okay. So these are some of the common supports and services that students can get in an IEP. So they can receive speech and language therapy. So before I talk about services, I want to talk about the difference between services. So I kind of hinted on this earlier, push in versus pull out. So push in is where the students can be receiving. So say, for example, if it's worded as push in by the speech and language pathologist, that speech and language pathologist is going into the classroom and pushing in the classroom to help with whatever goals and objectives that they created. If they are saying they're pulling out, so that means that they are going to the classroom, pulling that student out of the classroom, and they might be receiving speech services in the speech room. So sometimes the speech services can be worded as flexible. It can be like push in and pull out. Sometimes different providers want it specific. I just think that the biggest distinguish or difference between those two is that when we're seeing pull out, that student might need a separate setting or environment inclusive to learn those materials. When we're seeing push in, that student might need some generalization in the classroom. So say, for example, one of the goals might be their ability to express themselves or communicate their wants and needs. So in that speech setting, the speech and language pathologist is helping them and pull out, helping them vocalize and learn that vocalization of how they can express themselves. But in the classroom, that teacher or that speech and language pathologist is pushing in to help them generalize those. How do I ask for help in that classroom? So I think that's the biggest distinction, and I try to communicate that to parents regarding that. And then another service is occupational therapy. It can be either push in or pull out. Sometimes service providers can do either individual, like, so that means that they're just pulling that student, or they might have group. They might have a group session where there's other students in IEPs with similar profiles like the student and working on similar things. Physical therapy is one too. We also do have academic interventions or services. So students might be receiving reading, math, or writing. And then, excuse me, and another one is behavioral support. So students can receive behavioral support. So they might have behavioral goals regarding their IEP. So sometimes we have students that elope, they leave the classroom without like communicating to the parents. They just leave the classroom, and we try to figure out what the function of that behavior is. So we want to create a goal about reducing the amount of elopement that they have in the classroom, and that special education teacher will work with them on reducing that elopement. Or sometimes it could be worded as the paraprofessionals working with him or her, or it could be the social worker is working with that as well. So that is one behavioral support a student can receive in the IEP, as well as students can basically, if we're seeing significant maladaptive behaviors, we're seeing behaviors that are not diminishing through tiered interventions, through plans or safety plans, and they're still engaging in these behaviors. And we want to see what the function of the behavior is. We would like to do a functional behavior analysis. So that's an FBA. An FBA encompasses a lot of things in the FBA. We do like ABC data, which is like antecedent, behavioral, and consequence. So I'm going to break that down. So we look at what happens before the behavior, and what is the consequence of the behavior. So what is the student getting out of the behavior, in order to try to figure out what the function of the behavior is, as well as like defining the overall behaviors that they're engaging in. So sometimes the behaviors can be elopement, sometimes it can be non-compliance, sometimes it can be prompting. The behavior list goes on about behaviors that we investigate. But once we kind of do that FBA, that gives us more insight about the function of the behavior, so that we can think about what are some proactive and reactive strategies that we can implement to help reduce these behaviors, because we don't want the student eloping from the classroom, because that's vital time that they're missing. And we want them in the classroom functioning and being happy in the classroom. So we're going to try to figure out how can we solve that problem. So that leads us into the behavior intervention plan, which is the proactive and reactive strategies that we will use to implement to help reduce the severity of those behaviors of concern. Another support that students have through their IEP is paraprofessional support. I think this differs from district to district of how students get paras. Sometimes students with significant disabilities get paras. Sometimes there's data that we have to collect. But it's really important that when we think about students that have paras, if we're thinking about reducing the para or even adding the para, I just think that it's important that I'm always going to keep on saying this, utilizing data to warrant the need that that student needs a para. And say, for example, we're thinking about reducing how much hours or how much hours that the student has with that para. We're looking at the data of like, basically looking to see like, is there certain times of the day where the student is doing really well to warrant that that kid doesn't need a para, because a lot of decisions are sometimes made on opinions, and it's important that when we're thinking about our students, we're making database driven decisions. The last two that I'm going to talk about is counseling services. So students with emotional regulation, self-regulation, lack of awareness with emotions, executive functioning, the list goes on, can receive counseling services through the school psychologist, through the social worker. Every district is different, because in my district, mainly students that receive counseling services are only seen primary by the social worker. However, I have been in other districts where the school psychologist and the social worker are splitting the counseling caseload, and that student might be working with a social worker or the school psychologist. So it all depends. But students can also receive counseling services, and the counseling services look similar to the speech services, so they can receive push in or pull out. And they can receive either individual overall counseling services, or they might can receive groups counseling services. Sometimes we see students with individual counseling services where they might get dysregulated with other peers, and we're trying to work on something specific to their learning. That's why they might have individual, whereas like sometimes we see a lot of students struggle with social skills. So obviously in that scenario, we want to have group counseling, because then they can practice their social skills with other peers. So that's important. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is just the common supports or the placement. So I kind of hinted on this, which was the least restrictive environment versus the most restrictive environment. So that most restrictive is like where we see students in self-contained classrooms. So they are in the classroom for majority of the day besides specials. And it's like a self-contained classroom. So they're getting all their instruction in the self-contained classroom, and they basically have access to peers that are with a similar profile, or not really IEPs, but similar profile and disability towards them. Rather than the least restrictive environment is where students are having opportunities with typical age peers or the general ed peers. So that student might have hours in the special education room, but they also have, it's important that they have inclusion with the general ed.
Okay. Oh, Tamia, hey,
Yeah.
it's Yvonne. I'm sorry, I have to jump, but I didn't want to just like stage left. So I
Mhm.
know you're talking and giving your presentation. This was so educational, so thank you.
Thank
But I do
you.
have to jump off, but thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for answering all my questions too. I know I had quite a few.
I appreciate the questions.
All right, see you
All right,
next
you have
time.
a great day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay. I'm gonna stop here. Is there any questions regarding any of the common supports and services before I move on?
Do you feel like you've seen like an uptick in the needs for supports like since you started as a school psychologist? Just like given, you think about like COVID and those changed like learning environments and like screen time. And I don't know what else would like maybe go into that, but yeah.
So yes, I would definitely agree. I do feel kind of a rise with that, and I feel like I am with the most vulnerable age group of kids. I have worked with students that are like 2 to like 8, like literal babies, and I feel like a lot of it is COVID, a lot of screen time, a lot of parents that shouldn't be parents. And I just think that it's been a lot of increase. And I do think that some of the things that I do see that autism, like I said in the beginning, autism is more prevalent in our community. And sometimes I have this debate with friends and people in school psych, the school psych committee or school psych department about like autism and like, do we think that is it due to nature? Like, so kind of one of the arguments in psychology is like nature versus nurture argument. And so I'm going to break that down. So nature is like when we think about our biological makeup, like our genetic makeup, like is it due to our genetic makeup that these disabilities are more prevalent? Or is it due to nurture? Like, is it due to the environment that we place our kids in? Like, thinking about like proper care when people are pregnant, and then the environments that we place our students in. Like, I feel like when we think about low income environments and stuff like that, like, is it due to nurture, the environment that students are in, causing a more of a predisposition for some of these disabilities? And I sometimes I think about it and I'm like, am I on the nature side or am I on the nurture side? And to be honest with you, I think it's a mixture of both. I honestly think it's a mixture of both. I think that sometimes we might have the genetic makeup of some of these disabilities, but then we have that nurture, we have that environment that fosters these disabilities to happen because of our environment. So I do see your point, Haley. I feel like it is becoming a lot. I am seeing a lot of students that are coming in schools and they haven't been diagnosed ever. And I sit in those kind of conversations with those parents and I ask them like, hey, like, has your student ever received birth to three services? And they're just like, no. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, because birth to three services is a major services that students can benefit from, because that's like up to like when they're born, they can receive birth to three services. But it's just important that I think that when you're having those yearly visits with pediatricians, that you're being honest and open, because the pediatrician can refer students to birth to three, and birth to three will do an evaluation and they can receive early intervention. But it's just like if we're not honest, if we're not following through with these doctor visits, it's like the student's not going to get the help that they need. Which I don't try to discredit parents, because I know a lot of things happen. A lot of things happen. And sometimes students are in DCF care where they have been in different placements different placements over the span of a year. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Haley.
No, it definitely does. Thank you. I wasn't even thinking of any of the like, you know, demographic, you know, socioeconomic, racial, like the nature nurture that you kind of outlined.
Mhm.
I wasn't even thinking of that. I think I had like COVID on my mind or something like,
Mhm.
oh, that's gotta be impacting it. But there's many reasons why it would increase. The necessary supports would increase.
Yeah,
So thank
I
you.
agree. You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. So this slide is working with your child's school. So it's important just to keep communication open and respectful. I have sat on PPTs where people, parents have come into the meetings really hostile, and I understand. Like sometimes there's a lot of frustration that can happen even before the IEP, but I just think that if we're not open and being respectful, it's not going to go anywhere. The PPT is just going to keep on. We're just going to keep on talking about the same thing, and it's just important that we're just being open and respectful because everyone in the PPT, even though sometimes parents don't feel like this way, we all care and love your child. So just making sure that is just respectful and just even the staff members, I try to tell them like, let's be open and respectful. Request meetings in writing. So if at any time, so say for example, your student is identified with an IEP, you can request a PPT, a planning placement team meeting at any time. So I would just suggest you to reach out to the case manager. Before that student is identified, the case manager will be identified, so you'll know who that person is. And even if you don't know who the case manager is, just reaching out to the principal or the assistant principal to let them know that like, hey, I would like a PPT. Just making sure that's in writing, an email, or over the phone just so it can be in documentation. Come prepared with observations and questions. So like if you have any questions, make sure that you ask them, make sure that you review those records. It's important to review those records so that you can be familiarized with what's going on in school and how to help your child. Build relationships with staff, so get to know who your child is working with, facilitate that conversation. And just know it's okay to ask for help understanding reports and documents because I feel like when I first started off in grad school, I didn't know everything. So I just try to kind of have that mentality when I'm talking to parents because this is something new to them. And it's important that we are keeping an open environment where they can ask questions and feel supported. Okay. So these are some of the resources in Connecticut. So one of the resources in Connecticut is the Connecticut Department of Developmental Services. So basically, so this is a service that students can receive all the way into adulthood. So sometimes you have students that have the disability with autism. They might have the disability of intellectual disability. So this kind of helps students. So say, for example, if the parents or if their parents were to die before their child, this can be as a service as well to kind of be a supportive services if that were to happen. Because we know that sometimes we have students that with disabilities that outlive their parents, and that's not what we want. We don't want those students to be in the community with no services, no one to kind of support them. So that's major services that can help students as well as Disability Rights Connecticut. So this is just civil and legal rights of individuals with disabilities. So it offers like services regarding like decision making, educational rights. So it's overall like if you have questions, if you have legal questions, if you wanted an advocate, if anything that you wanted to learn about advocacy, this is really an area that you can benefit from. I kind of talked about this one a little bit in earlier. Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. This is another great resource where you can search for advocates. You can learn, they have like a lot of PDs regarding like how to advocate. And they also have like disability specific referrals, and they also have like family supports outside the school system. So I know sometimes some families do receive like ABA at home. So they can get you connected to ABA programs, outside programs, and the community that you can benefit from with a student with a disability. Also, Parents Available to Help. It's a nonprofit to transition adults so into the community. So it's overall like when we think about students transitioning from high school into the real world, this is another resource to help students in that kind of age group, high school into adulthood. All right, so the CERC, which is the State Educational Resource Center, is another kind of informational. It's more of like providing PDs and webinars and like just family resources to help improve your knowledge about special education and practices and partnerships. So if you want to learn some new things, this is definitely a resource that I would definitely benefit from. The next one is Birth to Three. So Birth to Three offers early intervention services for infants and toddlers up to age 0 to 3 with developmental delays or disabilities. And I just want to highlight just one point about Birth to Three. Once the student turns 3, the Birth to Three refers that student to their district. So say, for example, if they live in Hartford, they live in Manchester, basically Birth to Three is now referring that student to the Manchester district, the Hartford district, or the Windsor district. And at that time, the Windsor district would complete the what I call a referral, and then they would set up the overall PPT process, have PPT 1, have PPT 2, and then at PPT 2, we would determine if that kid is eligible for special education services, because a lot of districts have preschool programs, which they have students with IEPs at. So that's another service that I feel like a lot of people are not aware of. But Birth to Three is a really helpful service for early intervention. And then they partner with school districts to make sure that after students are kind of out of the age window of 3, because once they turn 3, they're not eligible for services. So that they can still receive services if we're still seeing some delays. So that's Birth to Three. The next one is the Office of the Child Advocate. So it protects children's rights and safety by providing legal advocacy and oversight when systems fail. So this is just another area of just advocates, resources. If you feel like the school is not following through with an IEP, this is another area where you can get resources and consultation from an advocate. And then the CT, State Department of Education. So this oversees special education services statewide, ensuring schools follow laws and provide appropriate supports. So if you ever feel like the school is not following through with the IEP, at this point, you would basically file a complaint. And then at that point, that would basically initiate a complaint. And then the State Department would investigate that complaint and basically have a mediation and go from there. Okay. And that is my presentation. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop sharing, see if there's any questions.
More like comment. Tamia, you need to be cloned. You literally need to be cloned. I mean, while others might be thinking of a question, I just want to say thank you so much. Your presentation was extremely comprehensive and very practical, and you're extremely knowledgeable on the topic, and it very much shows that you're passionate about this work. So I wish there was like a clone machine. We need to find it, because I think every single school and organization should benefit from your expertise and your love for this work that you do. Thank you. This was very refreshing. I enjoyed it completely.
Thank you, Kanisha. I really appreciate that.
I want to echo that. I'm not sure if you can hear me, Tamia.
Yes.
I want to echo that. Listening to you, I remember when I used the 504 plan for my son many years ago in the school system. As a parent, I was very frustrated. I wish I had you then to guide me through the process. So I'm happy that now parents have this information. If there are any parents sitting now listening to your presentation, the information is so useful that you provided, and it is something that could have benefited many others many years ago if we had this, readily available to us. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Tamara. But yes, I feel like I became passionate about special education because I just knew about the lack of services, how representation it was not really present as school psychologists, not a lot of African American, Black people of color. So that's really why I got into it. And I just think about over identification, under identification. I just hope to be kind of a consultation or just a person that parents can rely on me and feel like I'm supporting them and making sure that I'm just using, like I say, parent friendly language all the time because there's just so much jargon and so much acronyms that we use in special education, just making sure that that environment is inclusive and safe. And because once the parents feel safe, and that's just going to foster more helpfulness for the student as well.
Yeah, I have one closing question. What's one thing that you really, really wish that every educator understood about supporting students with disabilities?
One thing that I wish is, that's a good question.
I know the wish list might be long.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I'm like thinking about a couple of things, like what's on my wish list that's like a really top hierarchy. I think one thing that I wish is, I think that I wish that people give kids more time than actually being overreactive. I feel like sometimes we jump the gun rather than like taking a deep breath and like really figuring out like, or even building rapport with a kid. Like I feel like sometimes that step is missing because you're just like, oh my gosh, this is wrong with this kid, this is wrong with this kid, this is wrong with this kid, without even like working with them to build rapport and figure out what they like and use that as a strength-based perspective of like, oh, this kid is really good at this, they like this, to kind of like combat some of the concerns that they have. Because I feel like everyone doesn't think like that. They're just negative Nancy's and just expect things to be fixed overnight.
Thanks for sharing. Are there any other questions as we prepare to close, or comments? If not, once again, Tamia, this has been very refreshing. I appreciate you taking the time. I was overly excited about this topic. I hope you'll be given the opportunity to present this information in a different platform amongst and for our WISE members and a wider community. So that's something that I'll definitely have about your presentations. Extremely comprehensive, very practical to reinforce. Okay, so thank you so very much, my dear.
And I appreciate
And
everyone.
we're just gonna give her a round of applause. Yay! Yay! Thank you. And in closing, thank you for all our visiting friends that have joined in. This you had something to someone was speaking? Did I miss someone?
Oh no, I would just say thank you everyone for listening and joining.
I wanted to say thank you so
Okay.
much to me. I'm trying to jump in and out, but thank you so much as a parent of my son who was in birth to three and will be starting in the town preschool next week with speech in the mornings. This has been very informative and kind of decreased my stress level and my worries as well. So I thank you so much for everything that you do, and you had a great presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your feedback and your insights. I appreciate so much.
Beautiful. With 3 minutes to go, we just want to thank everyone that took the time. I know some folks had to jump off early, and they shared some sentiments in the chat also. But thank you to everyone that was able to join in today. Please spread the word. Tamia shared her contact information. I hope we're able to capture it, to share her information out there to folks that may have a follow-up question that they may have. Just a quick reminder that quickly approaching, just some logistics, that WISE Network will be facilitating a leadership series that is being facilitated by Dr. Tamar. She's on the call this afternoon, and myself. This will be on September 13th. We're asking folks to please share this information to any woman that you think may benefit from this experience. I just shared the Google registration form. Send out to anyone that you know from this. Visit Wise Network on Instagram and or the website to get more information. It's a great opportunity, and you just want to make sure that we get as many participants as possible, to maximize this experience. So thank you, everyone. And of course, in the interest of time, at 8:28, finishing 2 minutes early. Thank you. Have yourself a pleasant evening. Be safe and walk with love.